this over. Shabbat Shalom. Uh, it really is nice to see you here today. I was saying earlier that coming from last weekend where we had people fly in from all over from the United States and even Canada, thank you to Derek and Anna for the great surprise. My heart dropped in a good way when they walked in the door. It truly is great when you can fellowship one with another. You know, so many times I think in the Torah movement, people because it's prophetic. We're going to talk about that a little bit today because people are literally waking up battered. See, that's what scripture says is going to happen. Zechariah the prophet says, "They will remember me in far off places." So that's what's happening. People literally all over are beginning to wake up to something quite incredible. Listen, it's a move of God. So I am pleased and honored and humbled to be standing in the place that I'm standing, not just physically, although it's a beautiful place, but I truly, truly am honored to have an opportunity to share what I think is the message for our time. Today, we begin again. We begin again at the beginning. Where else would you begin, right? So, but I wanted to say just a couple of words in the form of announcements, if you will, just for those of you who might be living under a rock somewhere and you might not know this. This officially is the beginning of a joint effort that we feel is quite significant. For many years, although I've been associated with United Israel and I've been ordained with United Israel since 2003, it's something new, something exciting, something fresh in that James Tabor and I and the other board members have worked together very closely and very diligently over the past several months to bring together into one concerted effort this idea that we would go forward with a clarion call. If you heard James last week, he talked about the message that is to go forth. So I'm very pleased. This is the first official Sabbath of our new joint effort coming out of last weekend, which was sort of an inaugural kind of a kick it off. But this is the first official week. It's been many weeks since I've taught consistently. Jehovah willing, that is to change today. In other words, we don't know what tomorrow holds. But for me, as far as I'm concerned, if it is his will, I will teach on a regular basis, either from here or Dave from the desert of Israel, right? So Dave and I might, according to plan, we've already purchased our tickets, so hopefully this works. We're going to fly December the 9th to the land of Israel. We'll be picked up and rushed to a desert location where we will spend 21 days in the desert of Israel. We're going to be doing some work over there. We're going to be praying. And above all, I have to tell you this, even though it might sound strange, not to you people, because you people believe in Scripture, I'm going to be praying for the voice. I'm going to be praying to hear the voice. Isaiah 40 says, Nachamu, Nachamu Ami, comfort ye my people. Immediately thereafter, it talks about this. It says, a voice is crying in the wilderness. I want to hear that voice. The language is very specific in the Hebrew. In other words, it doesn't say a voice cried, because that would indicate past tense. It doesn't say a voice will cry in the sense that it's future. It says a voice cries, a voice is crying. I'm going to spend with Dave, my closest associate, time in the wilderness. We're going to be working the land. We're going to be praying. We might even be planting things in the soil. But above all, we are there for that main reason, to ensure that we are following God's way. Dave and I work together very closely on a lot of projects. We have to make sure that we've got this right. So we're going to be looking for guidance and direction. And I ask that you pray for us while we're over there. But in the meantime, we're going to be meeting here, according to our plan, every Shabbat, and probably quite a bit more than that. You just never know. If you're not following us on Facebook and the social media, you need to try to keep up, because this is my full-time gig. Dave has to remind me, Ross, the rest of us have jobs. We can't read everything you post every hour of the day. But try to keep up, because I might go live from the grocery store. Who knows? But the idea, though, is that even when we're in the desert, we have better internet in the desert of Israel than I have here, honestly. So that's our goal. So that's why I had to bring Dave. Not only do I love Dave, but I have to bring him because he's going to be my technical guy. I'm going to give him a shoestring and a tin can and say, I've got to reach Canada and Israel and all over the world. And he's got to figure that out. You have a tough job, Dave. One other thing is that Glenn Chatterton, as you know, we ordained Glenn and sent him forth. United Israel allows us, encourages us to appoint and install the necessary teachers. And as you know, Glenn has been a faithful associate of ours for many, many years through the providence of God. He and his family are moving to Michigan. As it turns out, this is strange, strange are the workings of heaven. There are two ladies that I know personally who listen in weekly, Nan and Grace, who live in the town where Glenn is moving. So what are the chances of that? So we're going to pray that Glenn, once he's on a 15-hour drive today, he's got to get there to start work Monday. But we're going to pray that those people begin to assemble. There's something about coming together. I encourage you to do it. But we'll talk more about that. One more thing. See, I keep thinking of things. This is a good thing about not taking good notes. My daughter, Callie, is having contractions. Now, some of you have given up on the fact that she is going to have a baby. She is going to have a baby. This will be our fifth grandchild, second granddaughter, both from Callie. So she is approaching that place where, you know, there's a difference in when you think you're in labor and when you're in labor. This feels more like labor to her. You don't know what I'm talking about, do you, John? But she said, okay, today might be the day. So I'm excited about that. And so after today's class, I hope to get there just in time and be there for the birth of my second granddaughter, Natalie. So keep them in your prayers. I'm talking to you today about new beginnings. I want you to fall in love with Jehovah more than you ever have. I want you and me to feel his presence in our daily walk. I want you to reach a place and literally hear a voice behind you saying, this is the way, walk therein. What a wonderful world it will be when the people of God are guided literally into which way we should go. This is my prayer. Every event in my life, especially these last few months, that would turn some people upside down, all I'm doing is saying, I'm ready. What's next? What's next? What's next? Because I sense that we are living in exciting times. People are distracted by all sorts of things in the political world and in the news and so forth. Listen, don't get distracted. Don't get distracted. Keep your focus on Jehovah. It's in him that you place your trust. We should be seeking him daily. Now, listen, in order to do that, we have to internalize what are his instructions. We need to internalize instructions. Imagine this. If you get something in the mail that you have to put together, how many of you, John, don't put your hand up. I know you do this. I do that. Well, you're kind of engineerish. You might. But most people don't follow instructions very well. We tend to try to do things in our own way. But see, the Bible says, don't do it with this. There is a way that seems right to man. The end thereof is destruction. We want to be guided in our daily pursuits by the Creator and his ways. See, his ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts higher than our thoughts. We must, in order to be the fullness that God intended us to be, we must find ourselves in concert with his instructions. Now, the world doesn't believe this. Well, I'm in the world. Someone said this one time. I'm in the world, but I'm not part of the world system. See? What I want you to realize is that neither are you. So we need to know what it is that God has for us in our daily activities. What should we eat? What calendar should we follow? What people should we associate with? All of these things are crucial to us becoming what God intended. See, we're talking about beginnings. We're going to go through, we're going to talk more about the Torah in just a few minutes, but we're talking about Torah now. God created us for something quite incredible. You're going to realize as we work through these initial sections of the Torah, you're going to realize the greatness that we are to be. Now, look, some people say, oh, I don't like that. We're not supposed to talk about the greatness of man. Well, let me tell you who does. Jehovah, right? We are created in his image. We should seek to follow his ways. So when we talk about in beginning and getting started, you're going to see that what is going forth beginning today, it's going to be evident that we're doing something different. There are a lot of places out there who are teaching. And look, I pray for those teachers because many times, though they may not agree with me theologically or doctrinally, you know what? People are in the place that God has them. And God is going to use some incredible things. We might look at the things that they're learning and say, it's nothing. I was there 20 years ago. Guess what? We were there 20 years ago. Why are we where we are? It's by the grace of God. So we need to pray for those teachers, but I'm also praying that those teachers have that veil that the prophet says, Isaiah says that there's a veil that's cast over the nations. Take it down. I want that veil lifted. I want people's eyes opened and their spirits in tuned. I want them to be lifted. I want people to be as happy as I am. And I'm happy. I want people to be full of joy. And it's because we follow the instructions. So here is lesson number one. Lesson number one. From now on, if you can help it, rather than think of, look, Dave, I'm moving towards the dry erase board. Sorry. Instead of, we're talking about Torah. Now, most of you know this, but here's my job as a teacher. I say it again, I say it again until you really, really know it. Torah does not equal, is it this way or the other way? Does not equal law. Does not equal law. Torah, let's do this in a green because green symbolizes life. Torah, can you see that okay on the screen? Equals instruction. Now, let me tell you something. We need instructions, and the Torah provides those instructions. What I want you to get is that I am teaching you the instructions. Now, when Moses went into the promised land with the children of Israel, Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 5, it says that Moses set out to, in Hebrew it says, to make plain the instructions, to make plain. Now, there are a lot of teachers out there that want to get real mystical and deep, and I'm going to show you the greatest secrets of the Bible, like, did Moses, they want to know where Cain got his wife from and all these things. In other words, people focus on what the Bible doesn't say, right? A lot of people want to focus there. Here's where I want to focus. I want to focus on what it does say. Now, in order for me to share with you what it does say, guess who has to know what it says? Well, I do. I mean, I have to spend my time. I have to invest my time to gain knowledge, pray for understanding so that I can impart wisdom. Doesn't mean I'm any better than anybody. It just means I've invested the time, prayed about, and I hope to invest in you the wisdom to impart. I want to impart the wisdom to understand the teaching, the instruction. Torah equals instruction. Now, when I say Torah, I'm also talking about, I am talking about the 5 books of Moses, Genesis 1:1 through Deuteronomy chapter 34. So I'm talking about that wonderful body of literature. Today's sort of going to be like a pep rally introduction to this. You can share it with your friends who don't know about Torah. See, there are a lot of people who've been lied to about Torah. What I want to do is give you some things from the scripture so that you can go to them and say, no, no, no. No, the Torah is, and you'll have some things in your arsenal, so to speak. So what I want people to understand, though, is that as I teach you these things today in the introduction, I'm setting you up for what is going to be probably, as long as Jehovah allows me to speak, this cycle of reading takes about 3.5 years. It's like a college education here, right? So if we're all still working together at the end of it, I'll give you a diploma. Well, I don't know what it's going to be worth, but I mean, might not be able to do anything with it, but you can sure be proud of it because you will have invested the time in learning God's ways. Listen, there is nothing more important in your life than to invest in learning to follow God's ways. Now, it's going to be different than the world. I promise you that. Okay. I want you to open with me this morning. Some of these passages you will know, but in the sequence that I've prayed about and that I've recorded in my notes, I think it's significant. I think it's important for you to get it. Malachi, the book of Malachi. Malachi means my messenger. Now, who would love to hear a word from Jehovah's messenger this morning? That's what we're here for. Malachi, in Malachi. Now, in the Hebrew, it's chapter 3, verse 22. Now, I've received so many notes the last few weeks that said, hey, when you start again, could you go slower on the verses? And in my mind, I say I should and I'll try. Some of these books are pretty small. They're hard to find, right? So Malachi, if you're in an English Bible, it's the last book of the Hebrew scriptures. If you're in the Hebrew Bible, it's in a grouping called the 12, sometimes referred to as the minor prophets. And it ends that book. It is, in many ways, not only its placement in Scripture, but in chronology, it takes the place of the final word. The last thing that a prophet says, basically, in the Hebrew Scriptures is this. Remember, verse 22. Now, the verses are different in English, so I think it's chapter 4. Someone online can help me out. Chapter 4, maybe verse 5. I can't remember. 4, verse 4. 4, verse 4. Check me. 4, 4. It says, remember the teaching or the Torah of Moses, my servant. Now, think about this. The last thing we get in the form of a prophetic message is remember the Torah of Moses. Now, listen, if God had intended for us to forget it, I would bet that he wouldn't give us this the last thing. The last thing you tell somebody in your life or in your encounter with someone, you want them to remember, you want to give them something to leave with, right? Here it is. Remember the instruction of Moses, my servant, which I commanded him in Horeb for all Israel, both statutes and judgments. Remember the teaching of Moses, the Torah of Moses, my servant, which I commanded him in Horeb for all Israel, both statutes and judgment. Not another Torah. It's the one that I gave to Moses. Where, Lord? At Horeb, statutes and judgments. So I want you to remember that you are to remember the teaching or instruction of Moses. Very important. So put that in your notes. Now, why would I invest the past 2.5 decades? Why would I encourage you to invest the next 3.5+ years of your life to working through a document called by the world the law? Like, you know what some people would say? Oh, honey, you're getting under the law. I'm going to tell you, no, you're getting in the instructions. You've lived your life. Now, guess what? You're going to read the instruction because you know what we've done? We've screwed up. Generally, people will go to the instructions after they've screwed it up. They go, where did I mess up? This is what this is about. Let me tell you something about the Torah. It is the most incredible, powerful, single most significant thing that you can invest your time in because it's what God gave us to guide us in our daily activities. And some people would say, well, I know I've heard from God and I've never heard the word Torah. Okay, well, guess what? You will really, really be in a place once you're aligned with God's instructions to be more in compliance with what it is that God asked from you. Why would you not? Okay, now, the Torah. Here are some passages that I want you to put in your notes. Go to Psalm 119, please. Psalm 119. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Psalm 119 while we go there. Psalm 119 is referred to as an acrostic. An acrostic. An acrostic is, this particular psalm consists of 22 sections comprised of 8 stanzas each. I can feel that I might go for 6 hours today, so get comfortable. 22 sections. Now, the number 22 is very significant. It is the number of perfection in many ways. The book of Jubilees, copies of which were found at the Dead Sea Scroll, talk about this, right? You can look this up. Look up book of Jubilees, number 22, because it tells about how there are 22 acts of creation. We're going to study those today. 22 acts of creation talks about there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Did you know this? That when the Hebrew Bible was first, let's call it canonized, because that's a term most people understand, in its original organization, it consisted of 22 books. Now, the standard Old Testament, as we refer to it in our culture, has 39, but it's because the numbering is different. So, for instance, here I just mentioned the 12 minor prophets: Hosea, Joel, Amos, Nahum, Micah. That consists of 12. In the Hebrew organization, that's 1, right? So you have to understand that there's same material. 22 is significant. So Psalm 119 has 22 sections consisting of 8 stanzas each. Now, in section 1, the 8 passages begin with the Hebrew letter Aleph. The next 8 begin with the Hebrew letter Beit. In other words, it's working through the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet. Now, if you have most English standard translations, you can learn your Hebrew alphabet in a good old King James Bible if you just go through Psalm 119. It lists the alphabet in order. By the way, you need to do that because we're going to be teaching Hebrew from this place. We're going to open it up. We're going to figure out a way to do it online so people that aren't here can do it. And look, James and I are kind of easy with this. We want people to be able to join us and do this at no cost. There's not a charge. There is a cost we have to pay, but you get what I'm saying. We want people to learn. Now, Psalm 119 is beautiful. It's the longest chapter, as we say, in the entire Hebrew Bible. And it's all about extolling, guess what? The Torah. 18 times in Psalm 119, David talks about his love for and delight in the Torah. Now look at in Psalm, we could read the whole thing, but we're not going to right now. If you look at verse 142, Psalm 119, verse 142, just because I want you to get this in your notes. It says, "Thy righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and thy Torah is truth." Thy Torah is truth. Look, if a lot of teachers aren't telling the truth, that's a fact. If I, of my own self, begin to testify whatever's on my mind, that may or may not be true. But let me tell you this. If I'm talking Torah, that's truth. Emet. The psalmist says, let truth spring forth from the earth. Look, every day I pray that truth springs forth. People all over the place are going, I think I need to keep this. That's God working in our world today. Torah is truth. Now, if you look, I want you to go with me to Psalm 1. Go back to Psalm 1. Very important passages as we embark on our new and exciting journey. In Psalm 1, very, very beautiful psalm. It says this: blessed. How many of us want to be blessed? Blessed is the man. Now, this is a generic term. It doesn't say blessed is the Jew, blessed is the Israelite, it says blessed is the man. Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand in the way of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scorners. But listen to this, but his delight is in the Torah of Jehovah. And in his Torah, he meditates day and night. Listen, he shall be like a tree planted by streams of water that brings forth its fruit in its season. Its leaf also shall not wither, and in whatever he does, he shall prosper. Now, compare that to this. Not so with the wicked. Not so with the wicked. They are like the chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore, the wicked shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For Jehovah knows the ways of the righteous, but the way of the wicked shall perish. That's good news. You talk about gospel? This is gospel. That's good news. Blessed is the one who doesn't sit in the seat of the scornful. His delight is in the Torah of Jehovah. If I could give you one thing, if I could just like pour it on you, it would be delight in this, delight in this, delight in this. Delight. Look at Psalm 94. Psalm 94. Now, this is my introduction. Psalm 94, look at verse 12. Blessed is the man whom thou dost chasten, O Jehovah, and teaches him out of your Torah, that you may give him rest from the days of adversity until the pit is dug for the wicked. Now that's pretty good. I think all of us want to be taught from the Torah. We should, because we're blessed if we delight in it and we learn and so forth. The Torah, listen, the Torah is so important. It's essential. It is so essential. Now, it's commonly taught, as you know, that the Torah brings a curse, that the Torah puts one in bondage, that, you've heard these things. Now, in my estimation, for what it's worth, there are a lot of false teachings out there. There are a lot of things that are not true. There are a lot of things which are contrary to soundness in terms of God's way. This is the worst. This is the single worst thing. If God says this is delightful and so forth, and that the Torah is true, for someone to say otherwise, it's the worst lie on the planet today. So we have a mission. We've got to change that. Look, Isaiah chapter 2 and Micah chapter 4 describes a time in the future, we're not there yet, where people literally will flow to Jerusalem. Like they'll go to Jerusalem for one thing. They're going to go to hear what? The Torah. The Torah will go forth from Zion, and the word of Jehovah from Jerusalem. Now, there are going to be a lot of people surprised. You say, wait a minute, you need me to go to Jerusalem to do what? To hear what? To hear the instructions. That's what it's about. Remember, Torah is truth. Torah brings blessing. In fact, there is a curse of the Torah, but guess who gets it? Those who are disobedient. Anytime, there is no exception. If you find an exception, please tell me. I haven't discovered it yet. To keep the Torah brings blessing. The only way you get the curse is disobedience. Now, I can't think of an example otherwise. So if someone says, and we're going to talk about this, if someone tells you, hey, Lyndon, the Torah is a curse, you need to say, well, I love you, but you're wrong, and here's why. You might not say it like that. We'll work on how you approach it. But you understand, you have to go with Scripture. Let God be true, right? Because there are a lot of people with opinions, all right? Now, David in Psalm 119, verse 97, you can just put this in your notes. He says that the Torah is his meditation all the day, the whole day. Like when he gets up, when he lays down, when he goes about his business, that's what the Torah is supposed to be. We should think about the Torah. It should be our meditation all the day. You say, well, I don't know if I can do that. You will. I promise you, you will. You know, in Deuteronomy 17, there is a clause, basically. It's called a Torah. It's called an instruction, because instruction, when we talk about Torah, it can mean Genesis through Deuteronomy, but it can also mean a specific instruction. There are Torah, plural, which deal with specific things. There's a Torah of the king. When you go, when you've settled in the land, and, here's what's going to happen. This is Deuteronomy 17, beginning in verse 14. God says, when you go into the land that I'll give you, you're going to say, give us a king like the nations. And that's what they do, right? But then it goes on to tell about that king. Now, one of the things the king has to do to make sure he's right, make sure he's in good standing and doing the right thing, all leaders, by the way, need to do this. He's going to write for himself a copy of the Torah. Now, according to tradition, that's the whole Genesis 1 through Deuteronomy. So some would challenge that. I don't know where I fall out on that. I'm open. It could be this specific one, because it says the king, you're a king, Shannon. You can't exalt yourself above your brothers. What's good in being a king? You're not over anybody? What kind of job is that? You can't multiply women? It's not fun. You can't multiply horses or silver. You're just kind of one of the guys. But you have this wonderful, wonderful instruction guiding you so that you make sure that you lead the people the right way. Torah. It's very important. Now, very few people see the glory and the beauty in these texts, but I want you to know that when I study, I want you to get in a habit of this. I learned it from one of my teachers, Johnny Powell. He taught me Hebrew. One of the first verses he made me memorize in Hebrew, I hope he's listening today, is Psalm 119, again, verse 18. All right. Now it says in Hebrew, Gal enai v'avita niflaot mitoratecha. He says, when I remember him, when he would teach me this, he'd say, listen, in English it says, open my eyes and I'll look for wonderful things in your Torah. But in Hebrew, Gal means to reveal. He says he understands this, and I trust him on most things related to Hebrew. He spends more time in Hebrew than anyone I ever met. He says it means literally to, like you're asking God, open my eyes, reveal, and then I'll look. So it's two parts. You're asking God, open my eyes, and then you're committing to doing your part by searching for what? Wonderful things in the Torah. Now, a lot of people don't get that the Torah has wonderful things. This is the word of our Creator. Now, here's something else. Everybody wants to know, what do you got to do to be saved? That was not very good English. What you got to do to be saved? Psalm 19. Psalm 19. I love this passage. I'm just going to read verse 7, but go to Psalm 19. I say I am. Verse 8, I guess, in the Hebrew, it says, the Torah of Yehovah is perfect, restoring the soul. Restoring the soul. The testimony of Yehovah is sure, making wise the simple. Now, where it says perfect, perfect means complete. It's from the root tamin. It's this idea of wholeness, completeness. The Torah of Yehovah is complete. It's whole. It's perfect. It can literally convert the soul, as the King James says it. Look, if you begin to internalize and follow and adopt these ways, It will revolutionize your life, will change everything. Now, we live in a time of famine, I believe. I truly believe this. I quote it all the time in Amos chapter 8, verses 11 and 12. You can just put this in your notes. I'm not going to quote, I'm going to more paraphrase. It says that there is a famine in the land. Not a famine like you go, oh, famine, people are starving. Yes, yeah, they're starving, but not for like bread and water. I mean, they are. They're literally are hungry people too. We can't forget those. But there's another sustenance that I see on the faces of people. I don't know who else does this. I walk through the grocery store and I look at people. I don't claim to have a gift here. I'm just saying you sense oppression. You know what I'm saying? People are just down. And I'm walking around. I had someone ask me after I got fired, they said, why are you happy? I said, well, I just, it's the joy of Jehovah is my strength. And I mean that. Look, there's a joy inside that makes me all but skip. Like I really am that happy all the time. Doesn't mean bad things don't happen, things that we shouldn't be somber about, but there is a joy that can help you through darkness at night, but joy comes in the morning. I want people to feel that. And so when I talk about this famine, people literally, you can see it on their faces, almost like a vision, like people who are, you've seen emaciated faces. If you look spiritually at some people, you see that look. It's sad. They don't know. They would gladly eat if you could help them. So don't forget them. You have to say, come with me and log in to United Israel. I want to, because we want to give them of the food that we have. Deuteronomy chapter 8, in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 1 through 3, it's talking about the wilderness. You've been in the wilderness for 40 years, your shoes hadn't waxen old. But here's the thing, it says, and I fed you. See, God took care and maintained everything that the people had miraculously. So he did this for one thing. He said, I want you to remember the entire way in the wilderness, your whole journey through the wilderness. Why? Because I wanted you to know that man doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Now, I say to you, I want you to remember your entire journey to this point. Your entire spiritual journey. What you might have thought of as bad, what you might have thought as wasted time, it was part of what you are today. It sustained you. What sustained you? God's voice, God's guidance. See, that's what we're talking about. It's about this famine. You are coming through the famine. You're now in a place where you're taking in the word of Jehovah. Ezekiel 37 actually describes it pretty vividly, the valley of dry bones. And he says to Ezekiel, Ezekiel 37, he says, prophesy to the bones. And what does he say? Hear the word of Jehovah. What happens? The bones come together. So it's sustenance. It brings life. Now, this is not the way of the masses. What I'm teaching is not the way of the masses. The joke, someone else said it, and I've said it before. Look, if I wanted to get rich, if I wanted to become a famous preacher and preach what everybody else is, we could all do that, right? Just give people what tickles their ear, and I'm through with that, really, really. I tell people I love being 50. I'm 50 years old. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to please anybody. I really don't. I don't care. I mean, I care. I don't want to sound mean. But what I'm saying is nothing matters to me now in any comparison to getting this right. This is all that matters. Now, the masses are teaching something else. There's a feel-good message. There's a, this tickle your ear thing. Nothing. All right, here it is. Go with me to Isaiah chapter 8. The book of Isaiah. See, y'all can't keep me off too long. Isaiah chapter 8. It's a message for our day. We're actually going to talk about the Torah reading today. Maybe tomorrow. Now, you're going to learn about white spaces. You will learn this term, I promise you, because this is what I call rightly dividing the word of truth. It's an ancient thing that most people don't know about. But my teacher, James Tabor, taught it to me, and you get to learn it now, and it's so important. People a lot of times will open up a chapter of the Bible and they'll begin reading at verse 1. They may or may not be at the beginning of a prophetic section or a thought or a this is where it starts. I want you to go with me to verse 16, all the way down, chapter 8, verse 16. And here is a command. It begins thus: bind up the testimony, seal the Torah among my disciples. Bind up the testimony, seal the Torah among my disciples, and I will wait upon Jehovah that hides his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope for him. Bind up the testimony. Seal the Torah among my disciples. Now, no burning bushes in my yard, no audible voices, but I feel this is one of my main jobs in life, is to bind up the testimony and to seal the teaching among my disciples. Don't get worried. No messianic pretension here. The idea of a disciple simply means a student, a learner. I'm a disciple. Now, it goes on. Behold, I and the children whom Jehovah has given me are for signs and for portents in Israel from Jehovah of hosts, who dwells in Mount Zion. Now, white space. Now listen, here's verse 19. And when they shall say to you, consult the mediums and wizards that chirp and that mutter, shall not a people seek their God? Why seek the living among the dead? To the Torah and to the testimony. If they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. Listen to me. Get this, if you don't get anything else. If you are listening to someone who is not bringing you with them to the Torah and the testimony, darkness, you need to run. That's what Isaiah said. It's the idea that God is bringing light. See, that's the mission. It's all about the Torah and the testimony. So understand that going in. Now, a popular lie is that it's too difficult. You just can't do it. You can't help yourself. You go in a restaurant, they have duck, they have chicken, they have pork. I just can't help it. I've got to go. People, and I'm not making fun or treating that lightly. Some people aren't we're all in different places. My point is that these instructions are not too difficult. We can do them. It comes down to choice. It's always been about choice. God's not going to twist us and make us choose. Moses has been with them for 40 years. You know what his last thing was? I put before you life and blessing, death and cursing. Choose life. The appeal of Torah is that it is a choice. So I encourage people to choose life. Now you think, I don't know if I like that, Ross. He's always telling us to choose life. Who would say that? Who would say that? I want you to get this idea. Look, there is a way that seems right to man. Does God really care about that? He probably doesn't. He's got busier things to do. No, he does. He delights when he knows that we delight in his ways. That's the bottom line. It's not too hard. Deuteronomy chapter 30. Now, these are some of my favorite passages that I'm using in my introduction because I have to make sure, I feel compelled to make sure you have all these together, packaged. Deuteronomy chapter 30, white space, verse 11 through verse 14. All right. We're going to go there. I want you to hear this. Now hear this. Deuteronomy 30. I mentioned Johnny Powell. A lot of times I'll quote. Is he on there? Okay, so Johnny, we're going to show it. Tell him relax. Tell him just relax. I'll get off in a minute, Johnny. So a lot of times I'll quote passages. You know, I grew up, my mom's here, and I grew up studying the King James. And so whenever God speaks in my mind, I think it's always King James, right? Because I'm used to that text. But so I'll quote sometimes, and Johnny would always say, be careful when you quote. You're talking about something very holy. You could misquote. It's a good point, right? So I'm going to read this, even though I could quote it because Johnny's watching. This is English, though. For this commandment which I command you this day, it's not hidden from you, neither is it far off. It's not in heaven that you should say, who will go up for us to heaven, bring it to us that we may hear it and do it. Neither is it beyond the sea that you should say, who will go over the sea for us, bring it to us that we may hear it and do it. But the word is very near to you. It's in your mouth and in your heart that you may do it. Here's the whole point of that. It's not too difficult. It's not. It's not too far off. Look, you don't have to, like, it'd be one thing if we're in St. Francisville and we go, man, I sure wish I could learn Torah. I guess I'll have to go to Israel to learn. Some people actually say that. I'll give you a little hint. You know that the Torah wasn't written in Israel? It wasn't. It was written in the desert, no man's land, just to show ultimately that this is a universal message. This message belongs to the world. Now, Israel is a custodian. They've been given a great task, a great mission to be a light to the nation, a covenant of the people. Ultimately, they are to share this message. Don't put the light and then cover it up with a bushel. You put it on stand it up, let people see. The goal, right, in Torah faith is that you and I live our life in such a way that people go, what a great God that must be. I wish I could. Can you help me? Could you show me the way? You say, yeah, this is powerful. Let me tell you about the Torah. It's truth. It's so powerful it can convert the soul. It's perfect. See, but this idea that it's too far away, that you have to get somebody from heaven to bring it to you, it's very near to you. It's in your mouth. It's in your heart. To do it, see, that's the key. It's not just a matter of reading it, learning it, right? To keep the Torah, over and over, it talks about to keep the Torah. And people say, no one can keep the Torah. Well, technically, that's not true either. In the Torah, the word keep, generally the word translated keep, is from the root word shamar. It means to guard, right? So to guard, you're really supposed to guard the Torah. Now, what does that mean? You're supposed to guard it, meaning that you guard it from intrusion. In other words, it says in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 2 and chapter 13, verse 1, don't add to or take away from. See, that's the key. We'll get into that in the early chapters of Genesis. See, because from the very beginning, you realize that's the first thing we want to do. We want to add to it and take away. It's not complete. We think it's not. Let me tell you the true deep secrets of the Torah. Look, run from that kind of stuff, please. It's perfect, converting the soul. Now, one other thing that I think has caused confusion as we go into this study, a lot of people will approach you and say, with the arrival of the new covenant, that has been done away with, set aside, and so forth, okay? Well-meaning people will say this, but the Hebrew Bible does know about the new covenant. It's not like this is some new idea. It's there, right? It's in Jeremiah chapter 31. The new covenant, I have it on the wall here because it's so significant. It is coming. It's not here yet, by the way, though some would challenge me on that. I'll just read it. I'll let the Bible answer the question. Let it decide, not me. Jeremiah 31, because this is important. Go there, Jeremiah 31. And beginning in verse 31, guess what? Add a white space. Because it's a thought that needs to stand out. Jeremiah 31. In Hebrew, it's verse 30. It says this. Behold, days are coming, says Jehovah, when I will make a new covenant, listen, with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. not like the covenant that I made with their fathers when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they broke, though I was a husband to them, declares Jehovah. But this is the covenant that I will make with them in those days. I will put my Torah, my instructions, in their inward parts and write it on their hearts. Now think about that. The new covenant, what it is, it's the instruction written on the heart. So you go, well, not that, it's a different instruction. Well, let's think about that. God's instructions imparted in such a way, because like we're human, we have our own difficulties and our own troubles, and we're not perfect in that sense, though we're supposed to strive. But this is when God intervenes. Ultimately, he says he'll remember their sins no more. And get this about the new covenant. When it's in its fullness, a man shall not have to tell another man, know Jehovah, John, for they shall all know me from the least of them to the greatest. That's when you know. So like right now, do you think everybody knows? No. Now, there's a lot of confusion. Some might be disheartened by the confusion, but for me, I see it as a great opportunity. I see it as an opportunity that United Israel sees as an opportunity. We recognize that this is one of the greatest opportunities presented before us. Some people see glass half full, some half empty. I mean, this is the most glorious task that we have before us, is to share a message. You realize Isaiah 45 says this, that ultimately from one end of heaven to the other, that everyone will know Jehovah. The prophets say that the knowledge of God will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. Think about that image for a minute. You ever been on the ocean? Think about the knowledge of God covering the earth that like you can't see. Have you ever been so far out there's no land? That's what we're talking about when we talk about the knowledge of God. It's so fully covering the earth that you can't see anything but the knowledge of God. That's what we're looking for. That's our goal. Now, if we are to remember the Torah of Moses, if one is blessed when their delight is in the Torah, that blessing that's brought about when we meditate therein all day. If the Torah is truth, notice if in Hebrew, if it's perfect converting the soul, should we then not study it deeply? That's the question. So when people would question you and say, why are you studying the law? You say, wait a minute. Why would you not be joining me to study God's holy instructions? Why would you not want to model your life after that which God says is perfect and able to convert your soul? Why would you not go with what God says is truth? I mean, it's a fair question, because people don't have to believe like me, but they have every right to ask me questions, and they do. I get them face to face. I get them in email. I get some that are less kind than others, but generally I try to respond in kindness and say, why would you not? You can ask me, why would I? Why would you not? All right. I think indeed we should. And I think that countless souls, it's growing by the day, of people who are growing weary and hungry. See, the rest of Isaiah 8, where I quoted or paraphrased verse 11, verse 12 says this, says they're going to run to and fro seeking the word of God. They really are looking. I mean, I believe that. I don't think it's that they're not. I think they're hungry. It only takes the right teaching, the right message to get out there. And I believe, this is what I believe, that when someone finds themselves doing God's work, I have to believe that God will bring more people to that. I believe that. And if it's not, now I don't believe it's, in my mind, I don't see a mega synagogue, as we would call it. That's not it so much, because it does talk about few, it's like a remnant. But boy, that remnant, if they have the testimony sealed, the Torah sealed among the disciples, I think that's what's going to change the world. I really do. Now, the instructions of Moses contain within them instructions for instruction, right? That sounds kind of interesting, right? In other words, how would I impart the instructions to a group of disciples should I set forth to do it? I mean, how? What would you do? Well, in Deuteronomy 31, let's go there. Deuteronomy chapter 31. This is instructions for imparting instructions. Deuteronomy 31, verse 10. I'm going to give you the broad category for how this is done, and then we're going to talk about how we implement that in a practical way. And Moses commanded them, saying, Deuteronomy 31:10, at the end of every 7 years, in the time of the year of release. Don't you just love how Jehovah, every 7 years, all debts, you start over at 7 years, it's just clean slate, back to what you got. In the time of the year of release, in the Feast of Booths, we still have our booth up. So we're going to take it down. We're not going to leave it up year round like some people leave certain holiday decorations. We will take it down. But it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I hate to take it down because it's a reminder of when God had his people dwelling in booths, right? So I look out at night when I'm up here. Now, it's during the Feast of Booths, when all Israel's come to appear before Jehovah your God in the place which he shall choose. You shall read this Torah, HaTorah Hazot, before all Israel in their hearing. Gather the people together, men, women, children, your stranger that is within your gates, that they may hear and that they may learn and fear Jehovah your God and guard to do all the words of this Torah, and that their children who've not known anything may hear and learn to fear Jehovah your God as long as you live in the land, whither you go over the Jordan, to possess it. Now, this contains within it an interesting methodology, if you will. Notice that the method reaches even those who've not known anything, right? We have questions like, what do we do? What about our kids? I brought them up in a different, how do I convey this to them? Well, that was an obvious question. It's not just new. Like religious organizations go, what do we do with the kids? You realize that everything, this is why it's so important for me to build a community, because I love kids. If I can instill in someone a love for God, a love for the Bible, put me with a group of kids and let me try it. Now, I'm not saying I did perfect with mine. Well, I was all over the map. I was in a quest for a long time. Now I'm trying to gather up the sparks, as they say, right? But here's the deal. Bring yours. Bring yours. I got it now. I'll do it. Because here, it's funny when God in Genesis 18, when he's talking about, should I tell Abraham what I'm about to do? Yes, because Abraham will become a great and mighty nation, and he'll teach his family and his household after him to guard the way of Jehovah, to do justice and righteousness. We get God's thoughts there. He's not speaking out loud. In the Torah, it says, God says, I'm going to do this because Abraham is going to teach his children. It's all about passing it to the next generation. I have some great visions. I don't know if I live to be 100, if I could see them all come to pass, but maybe someone else can. Maybe last week we had Nick here, Nick Smith. I love this young guy. My first memory of him, he was reading a Torah scroll he just turned 16. Who knows if he's not going to say, hey, I'm going to move to St. Francisville and I'm going to learn this stuff. And he might be the next, or it might be someone else's, or maybe one of my kids or one of my grandkids. It doesn't have to be patrilineal. It doesn't have to be someone related to me. We're looking for young people who will internalize this message and stand up and begin to proclaim and teach and preach. The world needs to hear it. But here's what the method does. By listening, and I've taught on this before, you'll get it more and more and more as we work through the Torah. Listen, learn, guard, do. That's the process. You listen. Don't jump in and do anything yet. Just listen. You're going to learn it. You're going to guard it, not add to, not take away. And then you're going to do it. It doesn't stop you from doing as you understand, but you get the point. It's a process. Now, the result is that they will hear and they'll learn to fear. Fear in the sense of awesome reverence, and it can be very close to fear, like you think, scary fear. That idea is the beginning of wisdom. Right? Remember, we talked about that. So every 7 years, now we're getting into, that was my introduction. Oh, yeah. So every 7 years. Now, what came out of that? Because you have to, how do you do that practically? Do you wait and you at least need to do that every 7 years. Now, what Judaism came up with, what we have now from antiquity, are two methods. One is the annual cycle of readings. That annual cycle of readings is very effective in that. We've done this for years. We taught this for years. I have probably 8 years worth of audio and video files of working through the Torah a section at a time. And that's practiced very widely by normative Judaism. In other words, if you went to any synagogue anywhere in the world, not any, most standard Jewish synagogues, they would be reading today. In fact, they would be reading the Parsha, the section of text called Noah. So you could go in, you could go like, man, I hadn't been to synagogue in a long time, honey. I think we ought to go today. And you could look at your handy calendar and go, okay, well, they're going to be talking about Noah. Let's study it in case they ask any questions. You could stay up, right? You would know. And that's a good way to do it. Great commentaries are written. I'm not here to suggest otherwise. Wonderful things. Many brilliant, brilliant people, far more sharp than I am, have spent thousands of years working on this instructional method. All the respect in the world for that method. There are 54 of those readings. It comprises of about 6 chapters. Now, Dave, I'm gonna ask everybody. This is kind of a different thing because we've got room to do some things. Can you, if everybody gets up with me and comes over to the table, I want to show people what 6 chapters looks like in the scripture. I want to just kind of show you. If you'll come over here. Yeah, you come back over here in a minute. This is just, I just do this to get you up because everybody might be asleep by now. You can stretch. Now, we'll just leave a little bit so the camera can. Okay. Look at these white spaces. Dave, can you zoom in? If I turn it like this, does that help? Or look, Sherry, can you move this chair? Look at the screen. I want to show people this. Just kind of pull that completely out of the way if you could. Now, this is the Torah scroll that was given to us by United Israel to take care of. This scroll, you heard the story last week. Ralph Bunton told the story. He and James, representing the executive board, gave this to our congregation. But this particular scroll comes from the 1890s in Calcutta, India. It's a beautiful scroll. I read the portion from this scroll personally as I studied. I want to do this the whole way through. Now, so the Torah begins right to left. So you would begin here. It begins Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. It goes on. This is the Torah portion. In the beginning, God created, and so forth, or in beginning at the first. Now, so this represents Genesis 1:1 all the way. And then you get over here, and the first Torah portion, which was last week in Jewish synagogues, is called Bereshit, in beginning. It goes from Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, all the way over here, down to Genesis chapter 6, verse 8. This week, in most synagogues, it begins here, Ele toldot Noach, Noach ish Sadiq Tamim. This is the Torah portion about Noah. It says, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man. Wait a minute. I didn't think anybody was righteous. Anyway, we'll get to that later. Now, so what I want to do, though, is I want to show you, this is 5.5 columns of text. Now, look how much we have left, Dave. That's a lot of scroll there. We've got several years to work through this. But what I want you to know is we, as a congregation, as a group, are going to work through at a little bit slower pace. Not because I think you're slower, but because I want us to really, really get into this. Now, is everybody up for this? Because here's what we're going to do. We're going to go from, this represents roughly a chapter, and we're going to go to about right here. Notice, that's all we're going to cover. So I have time to run my mouth or whatever, and then we're going to just go to, but actually we're going to go through this and we're going to talk about some of the key ideas. People are welcome to participate. I want the dialogue to change as a result of that. Okay, so I wanted to show that contrast. Now, you can go back and we'll take, now that you've stretched, everybody's awake now? I wanted to just take that and show people the difference between the annual and the triennial, make a couple of points about both. The annual cycle of reading was developed in Babylon. Now, I know a lot of people, anytime they hear Babylon, they go, oh, come out of Babylon. That's not what I'm doing. Much wisdom came out of Babylon, right? This isn't that. Yeah, I've heard this before. But what I want to do is I want to stress that we know from our ancient sources that that system of cycle of readings, the annual cycle of readings, 54 in all, came from Babylon. Just historically, it's documented. You can see that. The other system, which I'm going to be using, was taught in the land of Israel. All right. Some would say it makes it better. I happen to love this cycle of readings, both the annual and the triennial, but my heart is with the triennial. It took approximately 3 to 3.5 years to work through the Torah when you follow the triennial cycle. That's why it's called triennial basically. But it's not quite 3 years per se. There was some fluidity, if you will, in the way that this was gone through in antiquity. It wasn't so much what scholars believe now is that it wasn't so nailed down, say in the Second Temple period. So like you could go into a synagogue and you wouldn't necessarily know they were going to be reading Genesis 1:1 through 2:3. However, they did at an early date begin to preach and teach according to this cycle, and we have evidence from antiquity of some of these ancient sermons. So my disclaimer, and this is mainly because for years now I've wanted to do this, and my good friend and teacher James has said, let's really think about this. We've had a good dialogue about it. And one of the reasons we haven't done this cycle is because we said we need to show solidarity and stand in concert with the Jewish people. And I believe that. I think we should in some regards. But here's what I know. The group that I feel led to reach are not those who have a good understanding necessarily of all things Torah. Now, you all do. All of you are full of this, but I'm talking about the people, not you listening either. I'm talking about other people who don't quite have it all figured out. We want to bring them in And so this year, when we talked about it, James and I and others, I said, I'm hesitant to say beyond this way. I feel compelled to teach this. I feel driven. I feel led to teach it this way. And so you get to participate in this, and I think it's going to be amazing. I believe that those who are now waking up to the Torah's relevance require a careful study, not because they're slower, but because they've been separated from the Torah. So I think there is a special need to get in and get deep and take our time. You can do all those. Get in, get deep, take your time. And the pace of the triennial cycle is more fitting for my purposes, or if I could be so bold as to say, his purposes. Because that's really, I mean, if Jehovah doesn't build the house, then they that labor in vain. So if this is about my dream or my bit, it's got to be, it has to have more than me. So I think that the cycle we're going to, this 3.5-year cycle, in a lot of ways is interesting because I believe I've done more study in this than any other subject matter, probably. I mean, I've got a file that's this thick on this subject, the triennial cycle. In rabbinic literature, I'll say this, there are places where the rabbis would say the world was created in Tishri, like the 7th month. And then there another rabbi would say it was created in Aviv or Nisan. It's like the opposite. It's like the spring. Well, how would they both even consider that? Why would they both be? So some just say, well, they argue, 2 rabbis, 2 opinions. Actually, what I think was happening is if you begin this cycle in the spring, you go for 3.5 years, you conclude in the fall, you begin again. If you're reading that and you're a rabbi, you go, the world was created in Tishri. If you then go 3.5 years, you're in the spring, you start again, you go, in the beginning, God created the world in the spring. You see, I think that both 3.5 years, if we went through this twice, we would in effect work through what in Hebrew is called the Shemitah cycle, the 7-year cycles, and you would be providing 2 witnesses. A 7-year period is pretty important. And for some reason, I feel like some people would go, well, is this actually that cycle? I have no idea. I'm not smart enough. I don't know the math well enough. I've never been good at math. It's just a gut thing. I think it's time. I want to go through this, and I want to go through it using this cycle. We have one model for teaching on the Sabbath in the Torah, and it's from the book of Nehemiah, as we say in the South, chapter 8, verses 1 through 8, and I'll basically tell you what goes on there. Ezra is reading. He reads from the scroll. He's in front of the people, and then after he reads, he gives them understanding so that they might understand the scripture, basically. It's a beautiful story. Now, I want to use that model because I love things biblical. And you go, well, you didn't use that today. You talked for an hour already. But now I want you to get that what I want to do is I think we read it, then we discuss it. And we'll take a little break. But one of the recommendations, because people log in from all over and they're like, you take this long break to eat and it's horrible for the video. We're going to move right into this. And then people can eat while they go. And, so that's fun. But so here's the thing. Nehemiah 8, and I tell you what it does. It literally leads to revival. That's the beautiful thing. Because the people hear it. See, that's what Deuteronomy 31 said. If you read it to everyone, men, women, children, so forth. So that's going to be the order of the service. Now, you have to know about some special treats associated with this study. Things that you're going to get as a part of this that other groups don't get. And here's the first. Some of you know and have heard of what we called the Original Bible Project some time back. James was leading as the chief editor right before he was placed in a position at his university where he was a chair of religious studies, which involves having literally dozens and dozens of religious professors reporting to you. And he was in the busiest time of his life and writing books. But he started working on this translation. Now, here's the thing about the translation. You're going to hear a lot about this. The translation itself is actually called the Transparent English Bible. Now, there's a website that is being developed now, even as I speak, called transparentenglishbible.com. And you can go and read about the methodology. But here's what that translation does. How many of you have ever picked up an English Bible? You all have them in your possession here and listening in. And you said, I wonder how close this is. Because some are more fluid, like they might be what we call a dynamic equivalent and more a living Bible, and it's sort of paraphrased. Some are more literal. Here's what I want you to know. I want to bring you as closely as I can to what does it say, right? Here's what a lot of people say. I've had discussing doctrinal points, and someone will say, well, I don't believe that. Well, you don't have to believe it. And that they'll say, I had one guy, I'll tell you the story. A good friend of mine was a Jehovah's Witness, and he said, hey, Ross, you study Hebrew. Can you tell me what this says? And he points to a verse. And I said, what do you mean? He said, in the Hebrew. So I looked at the Hebrew of that verse, and I translated it very literal. And he said, that's not what that says. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, that's not what my translation says. I said, that's not what you asked me. You asked me what the Hebrew says. Now, if your translation lines up with that, that's great. If it doesn't, now here's what happens in translation. A lot of times, a lot of baggage gets carried over from the Hebrew to the English. So things that you want it to say, you got the pen, baby, make it say it. That's what translators do. What I want to do is not that. I tell you, I'm 50. I don't care about what somebody wants me to. I want to know what does it say. Now, we'll talk about what it means or what we think it means. That's a different question. But let's not jump there before we know what it says. If you approach the Bible saying it says what you think it says, you may or may not be right. Proverbs chapter 30, verse 6. It basically says if you add to God's word, you'll be found to be a liar. So be careful on that. Now, the Transparent English Bible. The goal of this, you read all about it, but here's what it does. It's like if you imagine this. If you could take an English Bible and let's say it was print, you know what a transparency is? Remember those? How you would print, you'd make a copy and you'd shine it up on an overhead? Here's the idea. You're looking at the English and you're peering through and you're seeing what the Hebrew actually says. This is so, we're trying to do this. I say James is a translator and I'm like the helper guy. I can help some and that's what I want to do. But the idea is that you're looking at, I want it to look like, feel like, sound like the original. Now, sometimes in English, that comes across a little bit awkward, for our English. I'll give you an example. Do you know in English, it's saying the river went east of Eden, whatever? Rivers don't went in Hebrew. It says the river walked. Now, what does that mean? If it says vegetation grew in some translations, Tabor's translation says, and a sprout sprouted. Creepers creep, flyers fly. You go, well, that sounds, no, in our, oh, come on, people might have said this, come on, Ross, that's too, no, that's the beauty. I want to feel it. Now, here's what changes people's lives. This is what I think a lot of people are saying, come on, Lord, bring that revival. And I think he's already stated it's going to happen when you listen, you learn, you internalize. But see, there's something about hearing that Torah read week by week, Sabbath by Sabbath, right? Lyndon and I have become the moon watchers. We're tracking this thing, right? 2 months in a row. Others have helped.
We're going to get a reputation.
We are. I know it. That's right. So we're watching the calendar. We want to know, are we in sync? I want to get us in sync with that too. So what we're going to do is, as part of this, each week, I called James and I said, you know, it'd be really great if we can do this triennial cycle and we can use your translation. It's only, you saw, it's only a chapter and a half, maybe. I'm going to read you that translation. I'm going to read it, and then we're going to talk about it. We're going to discuss what does it mean, right? So here's the thing. This is, it's going to be powerful because James said, yes, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. By the way, we've got, I keep saying James has translated quite a bit of this. Genesis is totally complete. Exodus is pretty complete, I think. But it's not just that he stopped there. He's worked on other sections from the prophets and the writings. There's a lot done. We're just continually, and I thought about this. If this takes 3.5 years, you realize Genesis is 45 weeks. We could actually be working on it and releasing it week by week by week. So you're going to get to download. Here's what I recommend. I have this beautiful binder. You can buy them at Walmart, Office Depot, whatever, a couple of dollars. I have produced a chart that you can find on our website. Things that aren't on our website will be very soon. We have our wonderful website designer who's helping us put these documents up. This chart covers, I'm not going to get into the details of it yet. I'm going to do a special video about it. But this covers all the ancient readings. And you'll be able to keep up with, this week, Ross is talking about Genesis 1:1 through 2:3. Next week, 2:4 through 3:22, so forth and so on. And it gives the ancient prophet reading associated therewith, right? So you get to see what were they doing in the land of Israel 2,000 years ago. This is the cycle. This is the cycle. You'll also get a copy, a document called A Reader's Guide to the Hebrew Bible, and it just explains the certain special things about this translation. How many times does the word God appear in the Hebrew Bible? Zero. Zero. In the Hebrew, God is an English word that is used to represent a Hebrew idea. In Hebrew, generally, it's Elohim. We're going to talk about that. By the way, those of you who participated in the quiz this week, I posted, how many times does Elohim appear? Genesis 1:1 through 2:3? 34 times. It's 34. That's the correct answer. Everybody that got it wrong, go back now and change it on Facebook so you can act like you knew. It's like grading your own paper in school. You just kind of fix it. Don't nobody will know. I'm not encouraging that, by the way. So having said that, I encourage you to go read about this translation. And after you hear it read, we're going to move to the table and discuss some of these things, maybe take some comments from outside and inside, whoever wants to. You don't have to, because we're going to talk. Now, here are some rules. I want us to stay on topic. Kind of hard, right? Because people want to go, well, brother, I want to know what about the last days in the book of Zechariah. If it relates to the reading, let's focus on the reading, right? Is that fair? Now, don't jump to conclusions either. Think about it this way. You all know the Bible. I'm teaching teachers. This is a hard thing, believe it or not. I'm not talking to people who don't know the Bible. I'm talking to people who've given their life to seek God, people who have real life experiences. You've encountered God in your life. And I'm telling you, don't go there yet. Here's why. I want you to approach the biblical text as if you're falling in love again. Like you don't know what's around the next corner. Please, can you try to do this? I'm not saying suspend everything you've learned, but I am. Because I want it to feel, this is the thought that came to me. I just give it to you like I feel it. Imagine you've been with somebody a long time and you want to rekindle that. Work hard at it. It takes effort. I want you to do that. I want you to think about, I love the Word of God. I want to get that back. The only way you can do that is take it slow, deliberate. Deliberate's a good word. So avoid jumping ahead. Now, having said all of that, I want you to hear the reading of the Torah, Genesis 1:1 through 2:3, according to the Transparent English Bible. And I always start before I read with this in mind. It's that verse from Psalm 119:18. Gal enai va'avita niflaot mitorateka. Open my eyes, and I will look for wonderful things from your Torah. So if you don't have this translation, stay tuned. This translation, I honestly believe, is going to change the lives of millions of people. Because for the first time, I believe this, there is going to be a translation which gives it as it is. There's no theological baggage here. If it says Elohim in the Hebrew, it says Elohim here. Here we go. I will say one other thing. Genesis is the English title for the first book. In Hebrew, books are named. This is in the footnote, by the way. English books are Hebrew books are named for the first significant word in the first passage. And so we get the name of Genesis in the Hebrew means it's Bereshit. Bereshit. Bereshit literally is translated at first, or in beginning, you might say. But so I'm going to read it. This is Bereshit, and here's the reading of the Torah for today. At the first of Elohim creating the skies and the land was desolation and emptiness, and darkness was over the face of the deep. The spirit of Elohim was hovering over the face of the waters. And Elohim said, "Let there be light." And it was light. And Elohim saw the light, that it was good. And Elohim separated between the light and between the darkness. And Elohim called to the light day, and to the darkness he called night. And it was evening and it was morning, day one. And Elohim said, "Let there be an expanse in the middle of the waters, and let there be a separating between waters to waters." And Elohim made the expanse, and he separated between the waters that were from under the expanse and between the waters that were from upon the expanse, and it was thus. And Elohim called to the expanse, skies. And it was evening and it was morning, a second day. And Elohim said, "Let the waters under the skies be gathered toward one place, and let the dry land be seen." And it was thus. And Elohim called to the dry land, land, and to the collection of the waters he called seas. And Elohim saw that it was good. And Elohim said, "Let the land sprout the sprout, a plant seeding seed, a fruit tree making fruit, according to its type, its seed within it upon the land." And it was thus. And the land made the sprout go out, a plant seeding seed according to its type, and a tree making fruit, its seed within it according to its type. And Elohim saw that it was good. And it was evening and it was morning, a third day. And Elohim said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the skies to separate between the day and between the night. And they will be for signs and for appointed times and for days and years. And they will be for lights in the expanse of the skies to make light upon the land." And it was thus. And Elohim made the two large lights, the large light for the rule of the day, the small light for the rule of the night, and the stars. And Elohim gave them in the expanse of the skies to make light upon the land, and to rule in the day and in the night, and to separate between the light and between the darkness. And Elohim saw that it was good, and it was evening and it was morning, a fourth day. And Elohim said, let the waters swarm a swarm of living life breathers, and let the flyer fly upon the land, upon the face of the expanse of the skies. And Elohim created the large water beast and every living life breather that moves about, with which the waters swarm according to their type, and every winged flyer according to its type. And Elohim saw that it was good. And Elohim blessed them, saying, bear fruit and be abundant, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the flyer be abundant in the land. And it was evening and it was morning, a fifth day. And Elohim said, let the land make a living life breather go out according to its type, animal and moving thing and living thing of the land according to its type. And it was thus. And Elohim made the living thing of the land according to its type, and the animal according to its type, and every moving thing of the soil according to its type. And Elohim saw that it was good. And Elohim said, let us make soil creature in our image, according to our likeness, and let them govern in the fish of the sea, and with the flyer of the skies, and in the animals, and in all the land, and in every moving thing that moves out about upon the land. And Elohim created the soil creature in his image. In the image of Elohim created him, male and a female he created them. And Elohim blessed them, and Elohim said to them, bear fruit and be abundant, and fill the land, and subdue and govern in the fish of the sea, in the flyer of the skies, and in every living thing that moves about upon the land. And Elohim said, look, I've given to you every plant seeding seed that is upon the face of all the land, and every tree in which there is a fruit of a tree, seeding seed, to you it will be an eatable thing. And to every living thing of the land, and to every flyer of the skies, and to every moving thing about on the land that in it is living life breath, every green plant is for an eatable thing. And it was thus. And Elohim saw all that he had made, and look, it was exceedingly good. And it was evening and it was morning, the sixth day. And the skies and the land and all their company were finished. And Elohim finished on the seventh day his work that he did, and he ceased on the seventh day from all his work that he did. And Elohim blessed the seventh day, and he set it apart, because on it he ceased from all his work that Elohim created to do. Now that is the first reading. These opening chapters of Genesis contain much. Remember, what we're going to do locally and otherwise, people may want to grab a bite to eat. I'm going to roll the scroll just so that it's not exposed if people want to come to the table and it's not out while we're eating. And then we're going to move directly into that. And you're welcome. I have some notes, some thoughts just to kind of prompt, but you're welcome to ask questions. I don't know all the answers, but we have some excellent people that are out there, great students of the Bible. And so feel free to grab a bite to eat, and let's move into phase 2 of our teaching today. Hello, hello. Can you hear me?
What about
Okay.
me?
Yep.
Now, what I'm going to do, let me make sure I don't have a baby here yet. Hold on one second.
Your audio's on now.
Okay. No text yet, so. Okay, so we are up. Okay, thank you everyone for staying with us. And I know that I did go a little bit long this morning, but that's what happens when I'm not able to teach every week. Just to make a point, one of the things that I've been thinking about, so for a long time I've wanted to do this triennial cycle.
Yeah.
And I wanted to wait until after the grand opening. Yeah. So in order to do that, it's sort of created kind of a wait thing going on. So anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to, I think we're going to be better off because it started when it started and we're in sync, and I think everything's going to work out. So I do apologize. Some have written and said, hey, what happened to Ross? You know, like they're going to go make a golden calf. Where's this guy Ross? And so I've tried to tell them, wait, don't do anything crazy yet. People are welcome to come and go, you know, if you have to go, if you want to stay, if you want to come up to the table, feel free. And here's the rule, just to let the local, I don't call on anyone, and I've got enough yakking going on. People are welcome to, you know, join us if they want or whatever. Right, Sherry? Mm-hmm. That's the way we do it. Now, I wanted to make a couple of points about the Hebrew and things that stand out to me. Mm-hmm. Now, this part of the class can last for hours. It can last for minutes. There's no set time here, but I want people online to, you know, feel free to ask questions too. Remember, let's try to keep it focused on the text. And if the questions are too hard for me, we'll get James to call in. So here's the deal. I did want to say, I wanted to make a point, and one of the reasons that I love the Transparent English Bible is because it uses the form of the divine name or title that's there in the text. And I want people to understand that, so that right now we don't get into any discussion or arguments about the name of God and how do you pronounce it. It's not even used. Mm-hmm. You know, in Genesis 1:1 through 2:3, all we encounter is this title, Elohim. Elohim.
Yep. And there's an interesting footnote here that it doesn't just mean God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that Elohim, but it can mean other things too.
Right.
So maybe we could talk about that.
Go ahead and mention that, Sherry, because you're referring to the footnote.
Yes.
To the word Elohim, yes, in the Transparent English Bible.
Yes. Elohim is a plural noun, but often functions as a collective singular, taking a singular verb. It is related to the Hebrew terms Eloha and El, meaning God, capital G, God, little g, power or mighty one, and can refer to judges and leaders, heavenly beings, the gods of the nations, or the one God of Israel.
Right.
So it's like not just the only name for God
That's
Almighty.
Right. That's right. And it's so, to your point, and that point of that footnote is, this is all we get initially. It doesn't call God by the divine name, which we meet with next week. But in Genesis 1:1 through 2:3, the only encounter we have with God, as we think about it, is through this phrase Elohim, plural.
And it's talking about the creation. So I call it the creator.
That's right. The creator. That's right. The creator is referred to. In fact, the very first words of this Torah portion, it says, Bereshit bara Elohim. Okay. In beginning, or at first, Elohim created. Now, that brings up one point that I wanted to make about the creation. All we're talking about in this first lesson is about creation. Now, there's a discrepancy. I said, this is the way fights break out. I said that I counted Elohim in its occurrences in Genesis 1:1 through 2:3. And I came up with 34.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think James says there's 35. Someone else said 35. Several said 35. I could be wrong.
Not a counter wrong.
It would be the first time I've ever. No, it's not. I was joking. It could be. But the idea is that in every time, I'm going to go count them again, and I'll post them. If I was right or wrong, I'll let you know. I thought there were 34. I still think there are 34. But here's what I want you to get is that 34 or 35 times you encounter God, Elohim. In fact, I like to just say Elohim. Now, a lot of times when we start thinking about these different titles for the Creator, you think about, you go, well, I mean, everybody uses the term God, so it's okay. But it's not that difficult for us to transition in our thinking. What does the Scripture call it? A lot of people in churches and various organizations, when they begin to study these kind of things and these deep spiritual truths, they say, why would you not refer to him as that? Now, so here's what I wanted to make a point of. The creation is very, very specific about this creative activity. And I went through last night. This is the fun kind of stuff I do. And I wanted to look at the verbs used. Like, how did God make the world? Now, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to go there. But I will say this. Here's what I noticed. For what it's worth, these are the verbs associated with Elohim.
Mm-hmm.
Elohim created.
Mm-hmm.
Now, listen to the pattern. Said, saw, separate, call. Said, saw, separate, call. Next, said, made, called. Said, called, said, saw, said, made. I'm going to make a point in a minute. Saw, said, created, saw, blessed. Said, made, saw. Said, created, said, saw, completed, and blessed. That's what it moved me last night because the pattern. Now, there are several verbs used. Here's what it always starts with: said.
Mm-hmm.
The creator spoke the world into existence. Now, if you think about that, that's what we have to understand. First of all, it begins with the word. What brings life? Remember, I was talking about the famine. There's a famine for hearing the word. The word of God, the word of Elohim, his spoken word can change your life. When the Creator speaks to us, it can create, like Psalm 103 talks about a new creation. It always begins. So God, it says Elohim spoke, he said. And I was reminded of Psalm 33, by the word of Elohim, right? The heavens were created. So I think that's powerful.
Can I stop you
Yeah.
right there? Let's go back to Elohim. Because I've heard people interpreting Elohim as evidence that for the Trinity, if you would. Like, this is plural. This means it wasn't just him alone. It was also someone else. How do you speak to that? I mean, explain to me that footnote about
The
plural noun, plural verb.
Yeah. So there are a lot of questions that come up in these initial texts, but here's an interesting thing. Now, this is my understanding, and there are different views on this. The one thing that's very clear, in Hebrew, you have subject and verb agreements. So this is your grammar class for the day.
Okay.
Whenever a word is intended to talk about plurality, a plural verb goes with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you would, if Elohim is intended to be plural, my limited knowledge of Hebrew would suggest that it would say Elohim, they created.
Okay.
All right. Now, look, there's some difficult things in the Hebrew. There are some mysteries. There are some things that I just don't quite understand. I'll be willing to admit that. But there's one thing about the Creator, especially when you begin to bring in passages from like Isaiah where Jehovah, once we know God's name, Elohim's name, it says, by myself, Jehovah speaking, says, by myself, I stretched out the heavens. Now, I could say this. Let's do this. Hey, let's all toast. Everybody act like you have some. Let's toast. Now, someone who's listening in might say, Ross just said let's. Is he more than one?
Y'all want to toast at the same time?
Right?
Or y'all pose.
Yeah.
Like, how y'all doing?
Now, I'm not making light, but what I'm saying is that scripture is very clear, and I believe. Now, I've believed over the course of my quest in all sorts of understandings about God and his character and his nature. But presently, I'm very, very much on the side of there is one besides whom there is no other. Now, Elohim is a plural word, but there are other words which are plural. I think of the word face.
Was the Elohim alone?
Could be. It could be that there are others around, whatever. The word face, for instance, is plural. And what I started to say was, I have one face, but even in our culture, we say that person's two-faced, you know. But the idea is that some words in Hebrew might be plural in meaning. Now, James actually addresses that to some degree, I think, in the actual footnote about the verb and the subject and verb agreement, I believe. The idea, though, especially like I said, when you look at Isaiah, Isaiah makes it pretty clear. By myself, I stretched out the heavens, and it's Jehovah speaking. Now, let's see. I mentioned Psalm 33. I wanted to move to this idea of the Spirit, because that, to me, now some people will say the word ruach that's used there, it can be wind or spirit, right? And I love this idea. I learned it from a first century rabbi. I read it one time. And the point is this: you can't see the wind. I mean, really, like you can see the trees blowing, you can see the leaves flying, you can see the effects of it. You can't see the wind. So it is with the Spirit. Now, what's so amazing is that when we first meet in Genesis 1 with the Spirit, which is very, very, it's like, right? Look at it. It says, let's look at verse 2. It says, and the earth, you have the translation here. It's this idea that everything in its state at first, when the creation began, it doesn't present this as creating out of nothing, right? Like you make an earth, and that's not the image here. The image is when Elohim began this creative activity, what you have is movement, desolation and waste, and then there's this deep, a dark, deep, almost an abyss. And then it says the Spirit of Elohim. Now, I'm going to make a point about this. Some of you have experienced this in your lives, I believe. The Spirit of Elohim, in Hebrew it says morakethet. It begins to move. The water's calm. Picture a total calm. And then it begins to move because you can't see it. You can see the effect on the waters. I would say that our lives are the same way. We can have a life that is dark and desperate and chaotic and desolate and waste. But when the Spirit begins to move, dull, boring, but the Spirit begins to move, and it does affect change. You can see the effect of the change. I like that idea. Now, I wanted to share with you, go to Proverbs chapter 3, verse 19. I want to take it a little bit deeper on the Spirit. Mainly because I think there's so much here that we miss. Now, Proverbs in chapter 3, verse 19 is what I'm going to look at. And it says this, Yehovah, by wisdom, founded or established the earth. By understanding, he established the heavens. By his knowledge, the depths were broken up. All right? Make sure this board is in the camera. Is there a glare? All right, Dave, test me out here. Let's see. Hallelujah. You don't know yet. I haven't written anything. Let's see what purple looks like. Is that dark enough? I'm really not a football fan, but LSU plays tonight, so maybe it works out if I use purple. Maybe it'll help them. Playing Alabama.
You don't have gold, though. That.
I love this dry erase board, by the way. Thanks to the Tylers who got this for us, the
I
family.
think the Tylers had to
Now,
leave us.
we're talking in this particular proverb about it's a creative activity. We're talking about the Creator says by wisdom. By wisdom, what happened? Founded the earth. Okay. By understanding, he established the heavens. By his knowledge, what happened? Anybody else open to it? By his knowledge, the depths were broken up and the clouds dropped down dew. This describes creative activity, and what do we see in Genesis 1 but creative activity associated with the Spirit? Now I want to make a point here. Wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Okay? These three words in their Hebrew, all right? So now you might know these words. Some of you know chacham is the root word of wisdom. Understanding is binah, and then knowledge is da'at. Wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Now they form an act. It's like a word is formed in Hebrew based on the first letter of each of these in Hebrew. Chokmah, binah, and da'at. And you've heard of Chabad. Mm-hmm. So the Jewish group, because that's formed because they're talking about wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Now, why is that important? Because what we're talking about is the Spirit of God. The Spirit of God incorporates these three. Now, let me prove it to you. Even in our lives, look at Exodus chapter 31. Now, I work around some very creative people. And if you, go ahead.
What was that reference in Proverbs again?
Proverbs 3:19.
Thanks.
And let's see, Exodus. I'm in Genesis. No wonder I wasn't finding it. I was like, man, I thought I. All right, so Exodus 31. This is the passage. Now, there's another reference to this, but this is just off the top of my head, and I know it's here. And Yehovah spoke to Moses, saying, see, I have called by name Betzalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur of the tribe of Yehudah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God. Now, good, look, this is Old Testament, honey. We're talking about the Spirit of God in the Hebrew Bible. Filled. How many of you ever heard, well, in the Old Testament, it just came on you. It didn't get in you. Well, you better read again. Not only did it come on and within, it filled the Spirit of God. Now notice how it's defined. Read them for me. Wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Now, you've heard of the fruits of the Spirit. Mm-hmm. Here's what I just came up with this. This is called the roots of the Spirit. This is a root, because you can fake the fruit. Now, I know a lot of people don't believe that, but you can put on a smile. But you can't fake wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. You know in a minute if somebody's dumb as a box of rocks.
That's right.
We're talking about a
Unless you're
deep-seated,
dumb as a box of rock.
and you don't notice. Right. I got you.
But
So
is there any hope for those that are as dumb
I
as a
don't take away
box
from
of
the
rocks?
point. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, to your point, I think we ought to pray for wisdom,
Mhm.
understanding, and knowledge, because these are, now notice the way they're listed. Now, so when it comes, this is just me. Now, I speak as a man, right? So here's the way we work it. We work it this way. You don't start off with wisdom. You gain knowledge. You get to know, right? Then you hopefully, because there are some people who have knowledge but don't have wisdom.
Right.
They don't even understand. They might know facts. You get, but so here's what we want to do. You want to get knowledge, gain knowledge,
Mhm.
which then you pray for understanding, and you, as you learn, you really get these points. Ultimately, this is what is the result: wisdom. Now, notice that whenever we're talking about the creative activity in Proverbs chapter 3, you have, they're listed in this order because it's talking about God. Wisdom, it's assumed, understanding and knowledge is coming this way.
Yeah.
When it says in Exodus chapter 31, he takes someone and he prepares them for something. Notice what he does. It says he filled them with the Spirit, and then he describes it: wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And here's what's interesting.
Yeah.
Bezalel
Mhm.
and Aholiab, it
Mhm.
says they could do anything. Dave has this. I mean, really. See, we have this idea when we talk about the fruits of the Spirit, and there's certain things that we go around.
Mhm.
But let me tell you what, if I say to Dave, and I'm not making light, Dave, no, I mean, I'll say, Dave, here's what we need to do. And I think that God gave him this special spiritual impartation where he really can. Other people are like that too. But there's nothing that I can throw so far, right? I mean, if there was, it's I'm not going to do it that way. And usually I've learned to trust that. But see, don't minimize how God can work through people.
Don't
And he
get him to
did.
cook.
Don't get him to cook. Well, see, I wouldn't have ever even thought to ask him to cook because I can cook so well. So
You don't have to.
yeah, that's right. So I want you to know that here's the other thing about creation, and I know I'm sort of monopolizing. You just have to jump in.
Don't worry.
I'm pumped up about this. Here's the other thing about whenever we talk about the creative activities, we talk about creation, and I'm not just talking about, Isaiah, by the way, the prophet reading attached to this ancient reading
Mhm.
is Isaiah 65, where it talks about, I will create a new heavens and a new earth. There's another creation, but here's something else. We talk about the creation of man in this particular Torah reading. We're going to really get into that more next week
Mhm.
because we're going to take that to a deeper level. But, you know, in Psalm 103, it talks about a newly created people will serve Yah. I think we're witnessing, in a way, a new creation that's happening even now. I think people are beginning to search after God, and it's because of a work that's going on earth. And one of the things that, when I think about this particular creation, you know what? One of the words that really stands out when I read through in the Hebrew, it works in the English if you look at James's translation, but a lot of English translations mask this. It's the English word. I want you to think about this because it has implications for your spiritual life. See, this is a Torah class. We're talking about spirit. Here's the word. Separate.
Yep.
Separate. You listen, when you talk about creation, one of the key words when God's doing a work and his spirit's involved, it has to do with separation. And he separated or divided. He caused the separation between the waters which were from above, the waters which were below, the night, the dark. Separate. Go through and count those. I would do it, but I'd probably miss it by one or two.
Yeah,
But I'd probably mess the count up. But you get it. It's separate. Now, we're talking about a holy work. Separation is so essential. We are to separate in many ways the secular, and I don't mean you have to like walk around, dressed like a monk and, things like that. Not that kind. But in a way, we're to separate from those around us in some ways. You be separate. You're to be
distinct.
That's a good word. That's a good word. The idea is that you do look different. You do act different. You do believe differently. You act different. So go ahead. Were you going to jump in, Sherry?
No.
The idea of separateness.
No, not on separateness. I did want to ask about the term in the Transparent Bible about living. How did he put it?
Life breathers.
Yeah, the living life breather.
All right.
That sounds redundant. Living life breather. You
Yep.
would think if you're alive, you're living.
That's a great question. All right, so let me show you why he did that. I happen to know this. What verse are we talking about? Because I'll pull right to it.
It starts in. Wait, did they? Yeah, 24. But I think it. In 20.
20, chapter 1, verse 20.
Yes, let the water swarm a swarm of living life breathers.
Okay,
that's the first of it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Let's see. Okay, now, so here's why he does that. Now, there's a reason for it. Your point is exactly why most translations miss this. Because in Hebrew, it's nephesh haya.
Yeah.
Now, here's the way, as a translator, you have to look at this, and you see the word nephesh. It's generally translated. If you get vocabulary cards, it's going to say nephesh means soul. Soul. So people get into this idea of the soul. But in Hebrew, nephesh, we're going to talk about that in a minute. So here's what you know as a translator. It's easier. Chaya, hi. It's not quite CH, but there is sort of a rough breathing H. Chai means life. You've heard the phrase l'chaim.
Yeah.
L'chaim. So we know that we have the word life. People are saying, he's trying to get the angle right so people online can see it. So the word chai, living, is clearly there. Now, the word nephesh, believe it or not, this word is one of the most frequently used nouns in the Hebrew Bible. It's one of the first words you learn if you're studying vocabulary. So, and I'm seeing Tabor's sending notes in too. I might have to get him online here in a minute. But here's the thing. Nephesh refers to the neck or the throat. All right. So it's this idea of breathing, right? So what you have is breathing and life. And what we're trying to describe is something that's a life breather. It's a living life breather. You have to say living life breather because, contrary to popular doctrine, there is a dead soul.
Okay.
Now, people go, you're talking about soul sleep. That's heresy. Look, I don't care what you call it. In the Bible, it talks about the soul that sins, it will die. Ezekiel 18, Ezekiel 33, shall I continue? There are those passages which clearly say that death can occur to a nephesh. So what the Bible is predicting, or what the Bible is describing here, is the living life breathers. Now notice this. They're in the water, they're in the sky, they're on the land. So all this idea, humanity and the animals, there is some sort of relationship there that we share in common in that we're living life breathers. We partake of the same sustenance that God gives, right?
Yeah,
You know, the
yeah.
expression, does God care for oxen? Absolutely, he does. Right?
I mean, it's a real simple idea. Air, without air, we don't live.
That's right.
I mean, I don't know how else to put it. It's like, you know, you can live, what, a week without food and
Mm-hmm.
2 or 3 days without water. How long without air? I mean,
Okay,
how long?
so this ties into man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Yah.
Yeah.
Meaning, coming out of his mouth, it's sustenance.
It is.
So
It's because, and that's a good point. Keep going
a
with it.
dead soul would be breathing air, but not
The word of God.
truly alive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Truly,
So, man, I'll keep going there, because if
Okay.
you think about it, next week when we get into the real personal the real personal creation story in Genesis
Mhm.
2, it says God breathed into this
Mhm.
creature that he made.
Mhm.
And when he does, he breathes his spirit in, and he becomes a living soul.
Okay.
Now, here's the way we generally understand, because we come from a culture which promotes this idea of Greco-Roman thinking. So you think we are body, soul, and spirit. That's the way we think about it. It's not biblical. I'm sorry to break it, but it's not.
Mhm.
Here's what biblical says.
And they want to split them all up.
Yeah, they
And
divide it.
one stays here, one goes there. It's kind of, yeah.
Yep. So here's the way the Bible describes it. Body plus spirit equals living soul.
Okay.
Your soul, nephesh, is everything.
Mhm.
Here's the deal. To your point, Dave, if you don't breathe
Correct.
Mhm.
for very long,
Right.
you're not going to live.
Probably, you know,
Not
they
long.
say 4 or 5 minutes. I was thinking this morning, how long can I hold my breath?
Yep.
You know,
Mhm.
We could do that. We could do an experiment. We could time you and see how
it
long
wouldn't be
you can
very
go.
long. I'm telling you.
But the idea is that you can take a lot from somebody, but if you take their breath,
Yeah.
that's it. So the idea then is that when you look at it, when you think about it, that's the biblical view. So nefesh hayah is what he's trying to bring up. Now, so you look at it and you go, that's kind of literal. I mean, it feels kind of rough. Now, here's what most
Mhm.
translators say. That sounds too awkward. So let's
It's
just
pretty
say
literal. Pretty
it's
literal.
very literal.
It is, you
So
know.
what most people would
dirt.
say is how do they translate it? A living breather, or something like that. The
Mhm.
way they translate it, living breathers but
Yeah,
the
yeah,
idea, it's a
yeah.
living life breather. It's trying to bring the Hebrew into English, so it's transparent.
Yeah.
Now, here's the other thing. If you look at that translation, you notice the spaces, like you read
Mhm.
Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through verse 5, and then there's a break. Well, that's the
Mhm.
break in the Hebrew text. Notice it's logical. It says, and it was evening and it was morning, Yom Echad,
Okay.
day 1. Then there's a space. And then you begin again. And God said, let there be an expanse in the middle of, that's the
Mhm.
second space. What I want people to do is, as we study, you work through and you recognize where are the breaks according to the text.
Mhm.
James just wrote, they generally translate that living soul or living being,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Now, does that express it? Maybe so. In some ways, it's trying. Translators have a tough job.
Mhm.
You're bringing concepts and ideas, not just word for word, but which is what this tries to do, but you're also bringing concepts and meaning from one language to the next. It's very tough. So I happen to know the struggle with translating nephesh, working with James on this and listening to him as he worked through this. Here's another one.
So
Go
he's
ahead.
saying no, a dead nephesh is not breathing air. So he's just saying it's there's no such thing as a walking dead.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
then,
if you don't have breath, you don't have life.
all right, okay.
Yeah. You were, though, I think you were trying
I
to
was
say
trying to say
spiritually.
spiritually dead. Is that
Yeah. Yeah.
does that line up? I mean, is
I don't
that
know what
right?
that means.
Thinking is
What's that mean?
Let's.
it means
let's-
like man does not live by bread alone. I mean that
I
you
want to
can be
go
a
there.
walking breather,
Yes.
but
how does he
not
live?
alive to Jehovah. Like he's not even there.
Your point is valid in that you can get so stuck in the letter and miss what you're saying. I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. You can say, and you did say, if you don't eat for a long time, you'll die. The
Sure.
Torah, this is not some Greco-Roman text. The Torah says this: man cannot live by bread alone, but by every word that. What is that talking about?
Right.
It's not talking about eating what you just did over here.
Right.
It's talking about your sustenance coming from something from God. To
and-
your point,
Yeah.
yes.
And another thing is, choose life, choose death. I mean, you can choose death, and that I don't think that's talking about a literal death. It's a life of death. In other words, the things you do, it's the opposite of the golden touch. Everything turns brown.
Yeah.
Everything
Mhm.
just you're
Mhm.
just not good at doing things or whatever. I don't know how to.
Well, you're making wrong choices.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Probably, and
So-
the consequences of wrong choices.
Right. So as
Sure,
opposed
I
to
know.
choosing life and the fullness of it,
Yeah.
that's kind of the idea there. I don't think we're talking about food here.
No, I'm talking about spiritual food.
Yeah,
They're also saying
yeah,
I'm-
that was
I'm
your
constant-
point.
I'm
I think
quoting
when
Deuteronomy.
you look
I mean,
at
choosing life. Yeah.
when you look at Deuteronomy chapter 8, it's clearly not talking about food like
No.
you go to lunch somewhere and eat
Right.
food.
Right.
So there is this idea that beyond your normal
Mhm,
consumption of the kind of food that keeps you alive physically,
mhm.
it's not enough because a lot of people eat that food.
Yeah.
But so back to Amos 8:11, the famine in the land is not talking about that either.
Right,
It's talking about the word.
right.
It's talking about the word of God. So there is validity in your point. There is an existence beyond the physical that has to be nurtured.
Mhm.
There really is. And now this story that we read, we're introduced to the concepts of this very physical, the creation and how it came to pass. But we're also talking about, when we talk about the creation, you look at this idea of separating light from darkness, and you can go very spiritual. The Dead Sea Scroll people did it. The writers of Christian writings,
Mhm.
Judaism does this. I like to start, like we're doing now, with the
Mhm.
text itself, but you can see how you could get into all these other questions.
Yeah.
It really does open up, and you get into some of these as you progress through.
Yeah, well, my point here is to either validate or dispel myths that I've inherited and lies that I've inherited in teachings
Yep.
as to what this means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think you have to promote there is a life, a physical life, and I think if we talk about how do you sustain that life,
Mhm.
there is the way that everyone knows. You have
Yeah.
to eat and drink. I mean,
And breathe,
eventually, yeah, that's clear. But to your point, and I brought that up in my teaching for this reason, there is a sustenance beyond that I think people are truly deprived of. And that is this idea that they're not being fed that which truly sustains from the inside. You
Right.
know, I think that's
Every
what's
word
missed.
I've perceived.
Every
from
word,
now.
which,
Yeah.
some people dismiss a lot of the words,
Mm.
it says every word. Then the
Mm.
goal becomes, what has God said?
Exactly.
Right.
What?
Now we get into that
Right,
next
right,
week.
right.
We get into that next week in the class because the old serpent, as we learn, you have to ask yourself, did he really lie? I mean, what's the one thing he says? Actually, he comes in, and one of the things he says is very interesting to your point. Hath God said?
Mm.
Hath God said?
Ooh.
All right. Interesting. So it is something that we have to consider as we work through. Now, very first lesson, chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 2, verse 3, we meet with this idea of marking time. All right. Now think
Mhm.
about it. when you talk about the creation, we cover the creatures, we cover the heavens, we cover the creation of man.
Yeah.
Psalm 8 says, what is man that you are mindful of him? I mean, when I look at your handiwork, the work of your fingers, the creation, have you ever been out in your yard and you look up at the stars and you just think, how magnitude, how glorious are your works and your creation? And then you think, what are we?
Right.
Now, in all of that context, you get this. And he created these lights in the heavens. Very special reason. Now, we in our modern culture, we just kind of ignore this. It hit me years ago, but it's really hit me recently, this idea in Isaiah chapter 66, verse 23. This idea that not only are the Sabbaths important. Now, we learned in this week's portion that Sabbath is the seventh day is the first thing called holy. The very first thing. You could think of a lot of things he could call holy. He didn't call man holy. He didn't call the creation holy, but he called time sacred.
That's wild. Because not too long ago, I was reading on Facebook, some liberal friend of mine or something posted.
Can't be saying that.
I have liberal friends that don't even believe in Jehovah. I mean, this is their point. They were trying to, I guess, help people not be stressed about time pressure. And they said, time is a man-made thing. It doesn't really exist. And it's like, no.
Excellent point.
No.
So think about that view
Yeah.
versus what we read today.
Right.
I mean, here's the difference. If time means nothing, and it's just arbitrary and just relax, time is time. And I mean, there's always a good reason to relax, but think about it. This says very clearly something different.
Exactly.
I mean, time is not man-made, but keeping of time or the breaking down of the units, that's what they were talking about.
And they were wrong on that.
And they were wrong on that too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's the Roman Gregorian calendar and there's the Hebrew calendar.
Now we've got different ideas of how we keep time, but what if from the very beginning, so God says, okay, week by week, we're going to learn something. Here's what I want you to get right out the gate. Time is essential. Time is important.
Sure.
Time is divine in that it says very clearly, look at, let's see. And Elohim blessed the seventh day and set it apart because on it he ceased from all his work that Elohim created to do. He set this day apart. Now, you remember in Exodus chapter 20, now there are two versions of the 10 commandments, the 10 words as we call them. Deuteronomy 5, where the Sabbath is associated with redemption from Egypt. But here in Exodus 20, it's associated with the Shabbat. So it's very, very important because even God's very own testimony, we talk about seal the testimony, it's really about Shabbat, plays in. Think about it. One of the 10 major things that God tells us is about Shabbat. You know what's so interesting to me is more and more people that I meet that write me or that come in and I meet them face to face. You talk to them, you say, what happened to you? How did you go from where you were? And they said something about the Sabbath. I just knew. I knew that I was keeping the wrong day or, whatever. But people are being drawn towards this idea of the Sabbath. Now we want to look at the idea where he talks about the heavens. All right. If you look back at verse 14, chapter 1, Genesis 1:14, Elohim said, let there be lights in the expanse of the skies to separate, there's our word, between the day and between the night. Now, a lot of translations would just say between the day and the night, but it says between twice in the Hebrew, so you get it twice in English. And they will be for signs and for appointed times. Now, look at the footnote, footnote 15.
So that's a marking of time.
Yeah,
to your point,
Mo'adim. Yep.
That's not man-made.
That's right.
Well, no, but I mean, just our watch with hours on it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
our way, our
Yeah,
ways.
our
of-
units, we break them
Mhm.
down. You basically got the sun coming up every
Mhm.
24 hours.
That's right.
You know,
It's like clockwork, isn't it?
yeah, it's like clockwork. Yeah. They
Moedim.
based it on that. Man based it on
Yeah,
what God set up. Sure.
Moedim. These
Mhm.
Moedim, I love this
Appointed
idea.
times.
Moedim it's an appointment.
Mhm.
It's a point. If you have an appointment, it's important to you.
You
You're
don't
going to
want to
be there.
miss it. Yeah.
Look, I need you to be here at 10:30 on Saturday morning. You know, people said, I'm going to be there.
Mhm.
It's an appointment. Now, it's not necessarily an appointment where, heaven demanded it, but Shabbat is, that's a time when you'll come together, right? So it's Mo'adim, and for days and years, and they will be for lights also. See, lights in the expanse of the skies to make light upon the land, and it goes on and on. But the idea, not only does light and darkness, not only are they separated, but see, time is very important. One thing that as when I was working in industry, the thing that I valued more than money, as I'd been there for a while, was time off. When I was younger, I didn't think about that.
How long
as
you
much.
been there? And that kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
Yeah, you think more in
Seniority.
terms of what are you going to give me for this?
Yeah.
But as you have a family and you want to spend more time with people you love, or you want to spend more time, people trade vacation time and time off. They love that. Sometimes they'll trade dollars for it. It's like I've read famous people with lots of money. If they could have anything, a lot of times on their last wish, they would trade time for anything. One second, let me get this.
You got the phone hooked up to that grandbaby. Yeah. Earlier, people want to know who the two ladies were with their backs turned to us. I didn't know if y'all, I didn't want to say anything. I was like, well, maybe they want to be anonymous a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We're incognito.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Well, no, they recognized Shannon. They didn't recognize
Yeah.
you, except, let's see, Erin said she met you at Shavuot when we
Yeah.
did it at the synagogue.
yeah.
She would be here today. Erin.
Yeah, she probably had something
She's,
going on.
yeah, she's on the
She's
internet.
on the
She's on
internet.
here.
She's
Online.
here in spirit.
Yeah.
But yeah, Pam, just an old friend, been around for forever. It seems like from the beginning, popped in and out on us. It's like, hey,
Who?
we,
Who's
I
that?
was just,
Oh.
Wanted to know who it was.
I have to answer the phone, see, because
Right,
most people
you
who would call me and say, "Hey,
you got in
you
your
got a
car and
baby
drove
on the
off.
way,"
We've been all
yeah.
right. We've been all right.
But this was someone calling me, thanking me for my service in the military. But anyway,
Oh.
thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you for thinking.
How much time was that?
That was some time.
Yeah.
That's right. Time well invested, I might add.
Yeah.
But as we think about, when we think about this first week, if you could summarize the lessons contained in just these very few verses, we have this idea that Elohim created.
Yeah.
Took something that was chaotic, desolate, and waste, and with the moving of the Spirit, created something quite incredible. Something quite beautiful, something quite remarkable. It's such that even today, brilliant people, scientists, everyone, they don't have to believe in God. They can look up at the stars and they can almost sound like David. I'm talking about agnostics, atheists, whatever. If you're in a starry night and you look up, how many could not or would not be moved and say,
Yeah.
that doesn't matter like it matters to me. I want everybody to believe, but to be able to look at it and respect it.
Yeah, and a lot of people with different philosophies and thoughts, they can agree with this, so to speak. The biggest problem most of them have is the 7-day thing. God did all this in 1 week. And I've had struggles with that. I've had, because I pick up a fossil off the ground and so to speak. But I don't really have a problem with this not being a historical record. I have no problem with that.
Or a day being 24
This
hours.
is Tabor. Let's see.
Yeah,
what
he doesn't
Yeah.
really, they really don't
Yeah.
define
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
what
Um,
actually
Yeah.
constituted a day.
today.
I mean,
Um,
before he invented this,
somebody-
listen to me.
Somebody's
before he
bringing
invented
up
his sun.
Kodesh.
But how could it be 24 hours when the sun wasn't even there yet? I mean, in other words, like timekeeping and so forth. So, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. Turn the volume on your computer down and then I'm gonna put you on speaker and you just go. All right, hold on.
He can't type fast enough.
He can't
Tick,
take
tick,
it.
tick, 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 tick.
James, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay,
Hi, we
so
can
we've
hear
got a
you too.
room full of people, as you see, and now you're
Monitor.
on, and as you know, we're talking about this first section of Genesis.
Yeah, first of all, I just wanted to say I love seeing you all sitting around that table because that is a very holy table. Where Ross is standing there at that end, there's a little secret drawer. Ross opened the drawer.
Is there money in?
And I sat at that end of the table and I wrote my book called The Jesus Dynasty in 205, right where Ross is sitting. So for me personally, I'm talking about night after night for months and months. I would go to the building after, dinner, 8, 9, 10 o'clock, and I would write till 2, 3 a.m. And I was all alone and right there at that table. So that means now I could have been in the chair Karen's sitting in.
That's right. Because
I'm not sure because I don't know how that. And I could have been at the end
Look at this
that
secret drawer.
Karen's sitting. So maybe I'm
Let me
where
see
your
if I
mother's
can-
sitting. But one end or the other. So that's the first thing.
Gotcha.
But I just wanted to mention that how moving it is to me personally.
And maybe,
we have
maybe that's a hint, James, for Ross to sit at this table and write his book.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I also wrote things on his desk too. So I wrote 2 or 3 books and my dissertation and so forth on that desk. But the other thing is just to think about you all gathered around like that is just so amazing. But the reason I actually called in is I just wanted to make more of a teaching point is I think I put this in the note on the TEB, but the moon is our best example. People talk about nature and the forces of nature. The forces of nature are amazing, but if you were on a beach anywhere in the world and you saw on the beach laid out in sticks, "Hi, how are you?" Like broken sticks writing in English. And somebody said, well, the water just washed that up. All the sticks got into line. It took, you just happened to be on the beach and, it's only happened once in 10 billion years.
Right.
But the sticks just got into line and you walked along and said, "Hi, how are you?" And you go, "Oh my God, that's like somebody left these sticks." Well, we all know that means somebody else is on the island. This is Robinson Crusoe. He saw the footprint on the beach, right?
Right. I got you.
When he saw the footprint, he didn't say, "Oh, millions of years, water's washed up and they left lots of depressions in the sand. And they kind of look like footprints, but finally, a footprint was created without a man." And he knew that wasn't true. He knew. We all remember the thrill of reading that as a child. Oh my God, there's a person on this island, because he saw that fresh footprint in the sand. Well, when you look at the moon is perfect because we can see it. It's just full. This is what nature is without. If nature just runs wild by its laws, you get the moon. So what do you have? You have windswept plains, you have craters, you have, and the scientists all the time, "Oh, well, maybe we'll find some water." Well, even if you have water, you know what you'll get? It's called mud. You'll have mud, okay? But what you won't have is this amazing DNA engineering that is basically this 4-letter sequence of basically, amino acids that fit together, this sequence of building blocks that are the designing blocks of the whole universe. And you will not ever get that just by the wind sweeping and the elements mixing and the sand blowing. And so when you look at this lush, pulsating planet we call the Earth, it is so stunning that remember our space travelers look back on it, remember Christmas Eve, and they can't even breathe because of the beauty of the blue-green Earth. And everybody remembers Carl Sagan's wonderful reading of the tiny blue dot, talking about the Earth. But they think it just happened. It just happened. On this planet, the wind swept, the waves washed, the earthquakes, cracked, and suddenly you had a beautiful creature emerging in a primitive form. I don't really think that's the case, in my opinion, and I'm supposed to be pretty educated here. Now, this is out of my field, so I can be stupid. I'm not a biologist. But, my gut tells me that when it says, and the earth was without form and void, tohu vabohu, look at the moon. It's without form and void. It's just like swept, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you begin to say, let there be light. So it was probably crowded with clouds and so forth, and let the dry land appear. You got to have dry land and so forth. Now, what's interesting is the order of things that begin to appear does fit the evolutionary order. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
You have the primitive creatures first from the sea, if you want to call them primitive, because even the smallest amoeba, if you ever even seen a flea that you can't even see on the end of your finger, is the most complex organism, more complex than anything we've ever created. You realize it has a brain, it has a circulatory system, it has, I hate fleas, but it has everything. It has absolutely, it's like no machine we've ever created, including our most sophisticated spaceships, would compare to a single flea.
That's pretty amazing to think about.
So it is, and it's so tiny. And we have these things on our patio deck. Some of you might know what they're. Teeny little red bugs. They're 100th the size of a flea. I don't know what they are. They're not chiggers. They're just these teeny little red bugs. Did you know they have legs? They have a brain. They have everything. They're walking around doing stuff.
They're probably
And
red spider
they're
mites.
100th the size of the head of a pin.
Man.
So when you say, "Oh, simple creatures emerge," no, they're not simple. They're more complex than New York City and all of its circuitry.
Wow.
In terms of complexity.
Even those.
So anyway, I just feel that I like to call the creation. It's not creation as much as architecture, craftsmanship, engineering. Now, the stuff is there, but when you begin to shape it into this amazing, stunning form, and then it can reproduce itself.
Yeah.
I mean, you've just gone beyond the pale, So when I read Genesis 1, that's what I think of. It's so eloquent, it's so beautiful, it's so poetic. It's world renowned. How we have other creation accounts. The Babylonians have one, the Egyptians have one.
I've read them.
Okay, go read them. Read them. Okay, believe me, this has no anthropomorphism in it. It has no weird, sea creatures burping out babies out of their belly. I mean, it's just totally different.
Yeah.
It's totally different. It's so
James,
eloquent. It's
could
so
I ask you a
beautiful.
question?
Sure.
You, in one of your comments, you talked about the moon and the planets. We see nature without the ordering power of Elohim. Could you explain that? Are you talking about the architecture, the engineering there?
I'm talking about DNA, the most amazing thing on the planet. DNA engineering. What is it? 60 billion? I forget the number of genomes we have, but in a human creature. But it's this engineering beyond engineering, where you take this 4-sequence code, basically. Our computers are binary. They're like 1 and 0. But nature has the 4 code, which multiplies it like infinitely when you add 4. So all we say is yes, no, on, off in our computers, and they're pretty amazing. But DNA has the 4. So every single thing is expressed in this code, this quatriform code of 4 sequence, and that absolutely, to me, is the handprint of our Creator. That's his
I agree.
handprint.
I agree.
And I don't think it'll happen. I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. You know, people, well, nature could produce that. Well, you know, you get a planet, maybe not our planets, but some planet somewhere, and they go, well, you get water and you get the right temperature and you get everything. And then these DNA patterns just emerge. I don't think the DNA patterns will emerge because if you look at them, they're extremely complex proteins.
Oh, I see what you're,
Extremely
yeah.
complex.
I see what you're talking
So-
about, the ordering power of Elohim.
Well, even to
He's
get the
such a-
T,
yeah.
the T and the C and the so forth, you know, A and D, to get even those amino acids, they're so complex in and of themselves. And they're just building blocks that hold a sequence that is actually just like a computer code. So our computers are vague echoes of this idea,
So
but they're not at all.
So and then you have the idea that, you know, the Elohim, God did all this and then he left it alone and let it take care of itself, versus
Right.
some people
right.
want to say, no, he's in charge of every little thing. So where's that fall? Where we fall in that? I think, that idea.
Yeah, you know, people can have different opinions on that.
Sure,
I'm not even sure what my opinion is, but I do think you know, we're not told how long the Eden state lasted,
Correct.
Mhm.
but the Eden state does sound more harmonious than our world today.
Oh,
Like they're
definitely.
not eating meat, they're not killing creatures, they're petting them and naming them.
And they don't
And so
mention
that
weeds.
clearly is not the way our world is operating. So it could be that there is a kind of withdrawal or disruption where things are just
What
almost like, hey, you want the world? Okay, go have the world.
What about this too, James? And your translation brings this out. It's almost at every step, it says, and within it, you know, it's like a seed within itself. So
Mhm.
it's almost, this image emerges as you read this, that yes, he creates this thing, but within each of the things that are created, there is the ability to produce more.
To reproduce.
Because it's without, you know, you look at the blessing part and it says, be fruitful and be many. You know, it's this idea that the creation is the creation. And then these elements of creation are told, now be many.
Mhm.
You know, it's like he creates within it the ability to multiply.
The
which
perfect
is-
creation, so to
Mhm.
speak.
Right.
Which
That's
is
what I
coming
thought.
to my point. You know,
It's the
Yeah.
most,
goes on
it's
by
the
itself.
most amazing thing on the planet that could
Mhm.
possibly exist. That,
It-
well, if we just think of ourselves with our own children, those of us who have children, you know, that a man and a woman combine their DNA. And by the way, the mitochondrial, for you women, you should feel very happy about this. Your mitochondrial stays intact, you know, and it's actually preserved in every cell of your sons or daughters, exactly as your mitochondrial, which is kind of nice. And then
Could be good or bad.
the formation of yourself is then a split between the two in a combination. As we know, we go, oh, he has his father's nose. Look at that left ear. That's just like his mother. We see all these things. Sometimes it'll go back 2 or 3 generations, and people have told me they can even see the way I walk. And I don't mean with my left leg limping. I'm just talking about the way I hold my shoulders. People have said to me, oh, that is exactly like your son walks. And it's like, well, what is that? You know, body language, the way you stroke your hair, the way you move, that's all somehow in there. But I think what isn't in there probably, I don't call it a soul, because I don't think it's this strange thing that flies in from outer space. I mean, some people believe that. I'm not putting down if people believe that. I think it's a aspect of the matrix of the DNA that we don't know. See, we can just see the physical.
Yep.
And I think there's another almost like invisible, you know how plants, when they photograph them with certain kinds of light, they can see an aura around them. I think, and Sherry can get into this, I mean, definitely they feel and they react to pain, and if you yell at your plants, you can actually get a reaction with certain infrared kind of photography. So I think you could call it a spirit because it's unseen, but it's not like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. It's not the physical elements that we know, what the 98 or the 105 elements that we know. There's another reality that works with the elements, and we tend to call it the soul, but that's okay. That just means the inner, maybe neshama in Hebrew, but I think that's what, when people say, well, I think I'm part of the lost tribes. So, are you kidding? You have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16, 32,
right.
64. What are you talking about? You're part of, you start doing your DNA. Oh, you're 10% this and you're 15%. You can't be.
Yeah.
But that's not this inner self that you felt since you were 5 years old. Not your body, but you, your ego, yourself. And I think that is probably passed on in a way we haven't discovered yet. Like there's, but I personally don't think it flies in from somewhere else. I don't believe in reincarnation. I think it actually passes on from the parents somehow.
I agree.
But
I agree
that's
with
just my
that.
view, that I think it somehow, as we see the physical, we can trace that, but I think there's an unseen energy aspect to that as well, and that passes on, and then it defines itself as the individual grows up, but it has proclivities, tendencies. You
I
see a
see
little
that.
kid and
I see that, James, in one of my grown daughters that I was separated from her father at a very early age, and she didn't know him. But I can see the proclivities in her that she would have no way of learning from him. But I see some of the same exact
twin studies have
patterns
been the most
and
amazing,
mannerisms.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
Because they'll separate twins for like 40 years and they'll come back.
Yes.
And have all of these things that are just like amazing. Oh, do you like this and that? And you married somebody named this, and you're interested in that. And it's like
all
there's
cases,
something else. It's not mechanical. But see, the other thing is, remember, what we call the physical is not physical. I hope we're post-Einstein here. E equals mc squared. So what we call physical, that's physical. What do you mean physical? It's energy. It's energy.
Creates mass.
So it's, we just use a word called physical. I don't even know if we should use that word. And it's an old Greek word, physis, but we use it to put things down. Like right now, people say, well, this is just physical. You guys sitting around the table, that's physical. And you're talking about spiritual. No, sitting around the table is spiritual. Yeah. That you would have entities that can sit and talk and think and breathe and discuss things, like we're like bits of matter that can like talk to each other, and you go, well, that's not spiritual. Right. Of course it's spiritual. Yeah. So it's everything's spiritual.
It's kind of like talking about electricity. You can't see it either, but we look at it as physical, but it's not. It's electrical.
Well, I'll let you guys go.
Look,
I'm
James.
amazed, though, you got 42 people watching, and it's been 3 hours.
Well, look,
so
it's perfect
you're
timing.
Into something, believe me.
It's perfect timing. I think today I felt really, really like this is the way that we should go. I have a daughter who is now, from what I can read on my watch, she is at the hospital. We are close. And as much as I love everyone,
get over there, Rush.
I am going to go to the hospital right now so that I can be there.
Yeah, and, Lori said when I told her Kelly's in labor, she said, tell him to get his ass over there.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm going to do. So
you mean
have
a car over there?
Yeah. But have a wonderful Shabbat. Thank you for calling in, James. We're going to work out how to do this on a regular basis to have you talk about.
I will say this, Russ, to you. You had a clarity and a presence and a power that is beyond anything I've ever seen. And it was amazing to me. And also, I love the idea that you're having dialogue, but it's over the Torah. It's not just anything. It's like over the... Anyway.
Yeah.
I'll let you guys go.
Yes.
I have some good teachers. So
and the place looks beautiful. What
Thank-
an amazing thing that this even exists.
Well,
Can
ki-
you guys believe this?
Kiss Lori on the cheek and tell her thank you
Yes,
from all the
yes,
people
yes.
who are listening.
Yeah.
And
So beautiful.
yeah,
It's
she
so
did a
gorgeous.
wonderful job. So
Yes.
Okay,
Uh,
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
everyone.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Have a wonderful day. We'll see you next week, same
And
time.
send us some baby pictures in
I
a couple
will.
hours. Okay.
I will. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.